that private exchanges are not for everyone. And we'll try and drill in here with our panel of experts and try and determine who they are right for and what's the right way to implement them. So I'd like to start with each of our panelists doing a quick introduction of themselves, explaining their company, and then also talking about if they're representing, and it'll be obvious, but are they representing the buy side, the publisher side, or the technology side?
Thanks. Hi everybody. Mario Diez, Quadrantone. Quadrantone is a publisher consortium owned by a number of major news media organizations. We are representing, call it the publisher. So because we are essentially aggregating into one common exchange, an exchange format across multiple companies. So, thanks.
Great. I'm Jeff Green, the CEO and founder of The Trade Desk. We are a pure DSP, so we're a platform just focused on helping the buyers. And by buyers, in our case, that mostly means agencies and ad networks.
And I'm Nick Hulse. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Rubicon. Rubicon's now become the world's largest independent technology platform. I guess according to ComScore, we touch about 97% of the US audiences. We've got a unique perspective because we have a lot of publishers, over 500 now around the world, which about 100,000 advertisers come to us through about 400 partners each particular quarter. So we've got a unique perspective on private marketplaces and the international perspective as well. From an RTB perspective, we've seen almost 200% growth in the last year. So our auction-based business is thriving with RTB. It began at about 30% at the beginning of the year of last year and ended close to about 55-60%. So we anticipate seeing those volumes across the platform close to 80% by the end of this year.
And I'm Jeremy Steinberg, SVP of Digital Ad Sales at The Weather Company. I think you probably all know what The Weather Company does. I wish I could control the weather a little bit as well. It's a little cold out there today, but this is my second week on the job and really excited to be with the company.
Great. Thanks, guys. And I think you'll also be able to provide some insights from from Fox as well. So it'll be great for our panelists. Regrets that Teri Gallo couldn't make it today. She's home with the flu, so hope you all got your flu shots. But fortunately, as mentioned, Jeff here will be able to talk a little bit more from the buying side and represent the agency perspective for us. Before we really jump into the kind of the whys and hows and some of the challenges, I'd love to get a perspective from the panel. What is your view on the state of private exchanges right now? And in that kind of, the definition seems to be ever evolving. I get hit up for, well, this is kind of a private exchange, it's private placement, this is private exchange light, this is where we are. And also I'd like to throw in, to take advantage, since Nick, you just got back from Europe, I'd love to hear a perspective on the state of private exchanges in Europe, maybe in comparison to the US. Mario, do you want?
Am I first?
Please.
Sure, I'll go first. Thanks for the cold weather, Jeremy. It's all your fault. So Quadrantone launched one of the first private exchanges about 2 years ago. We launched with Gannett Hearst, New York Times company, and the Tribune company. And we've been running the exchange for about 2 years now. And I think at first the strategy behind it was a number of things. One, is this going to be a more efficient model? Is the buying contingent going to be using these types of platforms to execute their buys? I think what we really have to do today and really have a frank discussion, is you want to start defining what private means, and more importantly, why go private. And from what we've learned over the last 2 years is that you really need a reason to go private, and you need to define what you're going to get in the private instance. So if you're a publisher, one of the big challenges from how the buy side looks at you is, how do you control where your inventory is living, and how do you maintain exclusivity of that inventory? And if you are going private, how do you differentiate between what's happening in the private setting and what's happening in the open market setting? And from there, that all comes from the publisher strategy of how you're looking at your different channels. And that's your direct sales channel, your sponsorship channel. You have your private settings if you have something to be private about, and then you have your open market setting. And there are different needs and different opportunities to gather intelligence from there. And one thing that we found out, just outside of yes, RTB has worked from the capacity of, we've seen increase in yield. Our exchange was up some 60% year over year. It's fantastic. But from our perspective, you have to start to be really strategic about it. Is it a business intelligence tool? Are we getting access to clients that we would not have gotten on our own directly? And can we use them to foster different relationships up front? There may be clients that we will never get direct. We're a local publisher, so I'm a local publisher group, and there are certain categories that are very difficult for us. So we use exchanges to source that revenue. So when you get into the term private, it's from the premium published perspective, that usually comes with a list of a certain amount of controls. But the more controls you put on it, the more friction you put on the marketplace. The more friction you put on the marketplace, the less efficiency and liquidity you have in the marketplace, which I know that Jeff can talk about. So, I'm not sure the market is still ready yet for private, but we're at the beginning stages of it. So,
Thanks, Mario, and we'll come back to several of the points that you made throughout this panel. Jeff, you want to talk about your perspective on the state?
You bet. So what is it and what is the state? So actually a friend of mine from Rubicon, Jay Sears, I think put it well, which is private exchanges are training wheels for publishers to get into RTB, which is I think what it started out as, and I think is a necessary step in the evolution. If I'm going to summarize the state of private, it's a disaster. Basically, I think what's happened is that the SSPs in particular went to publishers and said, hey, we'd love for you to participate in RTB. And publishers said, but channel conflict, and we don't really want to mess up our sales force or any of these other sorts of things. And so the SSPs said, hey, don't worry. We can create a process so that you can control anybody that shows up on your site in RTB. Plus, if you just want to use your rate card, we'll just use your rate card and we'll use those as the floors and you'll only get the things above that. Plus, if you want to make them fill out an application and give you blood types and blood samples and all those sorts of things, we can make them do that as well. And so they basically made it so that on the other side, a publisher couldn't say anything but yes. Of course, why wouldn't we try it? It seems like there's little downside, except for the conversation that came later, which is, how come nobody bought any of my stuff? Which is basically because of all the friction that we created, which I think is the reason why private marketplaces have been a disaster. To just point out the silver lining before I let Nick chime in, I think the silver lining, though, is that Deal ID, which is the technical component that makes up private marketplaces, is here to stay. We wouldn't be able to, I believe 2013 is going to be the year of programmatic guaranteed or forward market or futures market. That's something we are pioneering. I know that there are other companies in the space working on the same thing right now. That's going to be accelerated because of private marketplaces and because of Deal ID. So it's a step in the right direction. But private marketplaces as they exist today are not here to stay.
Wow, where do I start? Okay. So I think the first point is the challenge that we've got with this is some of the terminology we're using here, which is confusing everybody. Open marketplace, closed marketplace, private exchanges, platforms, what's the difference? It gets very confusing very quickly. So we've taken the position of a stance that we're just the technology provider to automate the transaction between the buyer and seller. Stay out of all of it, right? We're just there to help and automate it. RTB is a protocol. Let's not take that out of perspective as well. So what's happening in the marketplace, an interesting perspective international, I'll give you some numbers in a moment here, because they are thriving with it for a different reason. But in short, over the last year or so, year or two, you're right. Some folks went out into the marketplace with a PowerPoint and made a lot of promises about private deals, bad taste in the mouth, and so it slowed down the American market for sure. But what's really happening out there in the marketplace, on the publisher side, the direct sales across the board are softening. There's no question about that. So it's made the publisher think twice about how do I get more money, more profit, and more out of the digital side of this world. And there's a couple of things going on. So you have traditionally your direct sales side that's going out, that's softening. You've got your unsold, which used to be called remnant, which is now becoming more important because of what's happening on top. And then you have an emerging activity in the middle here, which is really all about packaging inventory in a way to both an open market and also to a private market. And so there are a variety of stages there. We have some technology that's built to help facilitate those pieces. And when we get talking about programmatic guarantee, whatever that is, we can talk a little bit about where we're not and where
Another
we are.
panel, maybe.
Other those pieces. From an international basis, Rubicon has 500 publishers around the world. They've got more than 2,000 or 3,000 website properties and so forth. We have more than 200 marketplaces active today. The significant difference is that the 15% of our publisher base internationally is actively working with private marketplaces and exchanges, and they are averaging between $10 and $15 in CPM. Whereas the US has got about 7 to 8% of the publishers are actively getting into these private marketplaces, exchanges, and they're about 8%, and they're somewhere between $2 and $15 in CPM. The reason that the Europeans in particular, there's some huge customers that have got involved in it. We've got private marketplaces for Dow Jones, for eBay, for Virgin, for Guardian, for Telegram, and so on. The reason that they're doing quite well is that they're looking at it from a different perspective. First of all, internationally, the transactional cost of the media buy is much more significant in their overall buy than it is here. So therefore, they've kind of backed into these private marketplaces using the technology as a level of efficiency to save some costs. Having done that, they're actually quite surprised in the uptick of activity that they do. It does take a lot of work, but they're a little bit surprised from that perspective. So big differences of early adoption around the world. They backed into it. They're doing better CPMs. It's getting somewhere between 3 times what RTB is on the private marketplaces.
So I think you guys kind of all nailed it, so I won't, beat a dead horse. But it's been challenging up until now for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of people in the middle that makes it complicated. But I think looking forward, I see a bright future opportunity in 2013 and beyond, because just the level of conversations that I'm seeing with clients and agencies about how do we transact in a private or preferred manner are far greater than they were a year ago. So I don't know if 2013 is the year of private or preferred deals, but I think you're going to hear a lot about futures and some sort of guaranteed premium, because it really is an efficient. If you can get through the tech gobbledygook, there's a lot of it is very efficient, and I think it can work very well with premium sponsorships. So I think it's a fast-growing segment. I don't necessarily view it as cannibalizing our premium business, but I think it's actually just going to benefit advertiser and publisher alike.
Great, and I think that'll definitely be another topic that we'll talk through on the panel, through that channel conflict. I think Steve mentioned in the beginning, we're a publisher. We represent, call it 60 million unique Comscore uniques across all of our properties and our affiliates. We've definitely jumped at this point, kind of jumped into the open markets and getting lots of well-meaning folks reaching out to us to open up and create a private exchange, a private marketplace. We haven't done it yet, as I'm still learning. So I'd love to hear first from Mario and from Jeremy. And I think, Mario, you started touching on this earlier. What was your primary reasons for going private? What were your expectations at that time? What opportunities were you trying to capture? And then we'll kind of dig into how that's materialized or not, and dig into some of the challenges.
Well, I think I touched on this when I talked a little bit. When we started, we saw it as an opportunity. Everybody and their mother were talking about how the world was going programmatic. This was 2 years ago. Everybody was talking about private exchanges, and just by the conversations that we started to hear, it seemed only natural that the programmatic channel would be one that would benefit a consortium like Quadrant One. And for us, it makes a lot of sense, because forecasting inventory such as news, I don't know if there's other news publishers in there, and you could have a story take off tomorrow that you had no idea would be a major event, or you can have a tornado hit, somewhere in Arkansas, and you skyrocket your inventory. So programmatic makes an incredible amount of sense. for us, because it's just difficult to call somebody and source that revenue on a direct basis. But so we went into it, eyes wide open, and we said, look, we're not going to, when we went to our publishers, we said, we're not going to go in there with any major directives. We're going to sit and learn, and we're going to test. And when we started out going private, our assumption was that the world was already there, and it really wasn't. And the market still, in the automated field, is still very much driven by automation, DR advertisers, and we're starting to see that seep into what's happening on the brand perspective. So our belief was that we're going to put premium inventory in, because that's what we heard from our holding company partners, and that this would be a means to source new revenue. But from a premium publisher perspective, the difficulty is that we like controls, and we don't want to cannibalize our business, let alone some of our publishers' premium business. So what we quickly found out is that there's a lot of controls that create a lot of friction, and we don't think the market was necessarily ready for all that yet. So expectations weren't necessarily met, so we started to use it differently. We started to use it as, how do we source revenue that we would not get on our own, and use that to kind of funnel in pricing intelligence, category intelligence of what's happening on the direct side. Now we actually see that kind of merging together with our direct sales staff selling into the programmatic channel, which is a completely different conversation. But that's kind of where we are, right now.
So Weather was one of the first companies to launch a private marketplace. And I don't want to speak, this was obviously way before I got there, so I don't want to speak for what the decisions were at the time. But I think basically, like any premium publisher, me being at Fox News, Mario, you basically say, okay, this seems like a better way to transact on your non-guaranteed inventory. It's more transparent than working with ad networks. So let's test the waters, right? Let's see what happens. And then and it's a safe way to try something. And I think we'd all probably agree that those publishers that don't try new things, there's no benefit to not trying new things, because the marketplace is evolving so rapidly. And I think over time, as Weather and other premium publishers got more comfortable with the fact that it wasn't going to crater the other aspects of their business, they said, okay, well, let's dial this part of the business up. Revenue looks good, CPMs are pretty strong. And so that's kind of, I think, how it's been evolving. I think another element that isn't really talked about is the information that, as a premium publisher, you get in return by participating. So by not participating, you don't really know what's going on, but when you start participating, you realize, hey, how are people bidding on my inventory? What are they bidding on? And that sort of thought process actually makes you a lot smarter in how you then go and speak to clients about their needs.
Yeah, there was just one other point. I think, rewind the clock some 3, 4, 5 years ago, from a publisher perspective, it was sold what you can direct, and then you kicked over whatever percentage you wanted into remnant. Next thing you know, you had brand A, B, and C coming into your portfolio, and you had no idea where it was coming from, who was selling it, and what the price was. So that's been completely taken down. Now you can see all the different buyers for all the different brands, and your primary vehicle for generating revenue, which is most likely your direct sales staff, the intelligence of what they'll get from that is remarkable, because you can go in and say, well, they're using 2 DSPs, they're using 5 networks, and there's actually things that you can uncover here to make it simpler and create less friction. The challenge for the publisher, though, is this is a huge educational period for who is responsible for that communication back out to the marketplace. And traditionally, what we're all facing right now is that we haven't been trained, so we're all making this up on the fly. And if anybody tells you differently, they're lying, because we're learning as we go.
Nick, you want to throw in some thoughts? I'd love to hear about, I think for news, weather, it makes a ton of sense. You've got a lot of lifestyle publishers that have also adopted a private network. Can you talk a little about that and what their motivations have been?
Yeah, I think the context of all these are great comments, and you're getting perspective of publishers that's very, very important, because they control and own the inventory. But I think, RTB, private marketplaces, they're all steps towards automating this industry that's horribly manual in so many areas. And we're trying to grow it and create more efficiency and take more brand dollars in as well as DR. We're trying to get more spend coming in from the television side of it. We're trying to grow the industry. And it won't grow unless we have more efficiencies in here. So what we're talking about specifically here today is some levels of efficiencies and tools that would allow the publishers to basically classify, package their inventory in ways that are appealing for the buyers to get access to them, whether it be in part or in full or across multiple ones. So the way we look at it at Rubicon is that you're looking at auctions there and private marketplaces, and then you have orders. And I think the evolution that's going to go on with this automation, which is what we're focused on, is how do you take the inventory and package it in such a way and give all the controls to the publishers, because we sit underneath them there, and then how do you bring the buyers in such a way so the buyers can either bid on real-time inventory, or they can look at and reserve inventory, or they can book and buy inventory, which is the evolution of programmatic guarantee or whatever we decide to call that. So it's all parts of the automation piece of it. I think in any industry you're going to get some early adopters. We have some great early adopters on the trading desk side. I know Viveki is very advanced. Acuin is advanced in the international sides of it, where they're really doing some clever things close with publishers about packaging inventory and getting more of their money through, because they basically want access to the inventory, and they want to be able to access it in volume where possible at a fair market price, right? And there's a lot of things going on. Mario, you said there's a lot of education. We did 6 summits last year, which are expensive. We bring a lot of people in to do them, and there were over 500 meetings between publishers and trading desks in there just to educate them about it. And they weren't sitting in these meetings talking about the efficiency of what the technology can bring to them. It was more about channel conflict and worrying about direct versus unsold versus remnant versus closed versus open, and they'd lost perspective on, let's put the technology aside. What do we want to do as a business, and how do we want to package and sell our inventory?
From listening to you just now, Mario and Jeremy, seems like things have been working pretty well. There's been a lot of lofty expectations, but it's kind of moving along. Nick, of course, says things are great. If you look at Europe, it's even further adopted, and where he hopes the U.S. will go. But Jeff said that the current state is a bit of a disaster. So, digging in, what have been the unmet expectations? What have been the challenges that you're dealing with right now?
Sorry, can I just say one quick thing? So, when we talk about private exchanges, tempered, there's still some challenges, and it's not growing as quickly as we would like. But that's only one part of our business. We also work in programmatic regular, or whatever you want to call it, unleaded, okay? And in that part of the business, we have just as much control, and that business is killing it. So although we have this one part of the bit, I don't want people to think that, programmatic is dead because, the private side is not working. This marketplace is working, and if you're a premium publisher and you're not participating, private or not, it's just crazy time, because there's so much opportunity, there's so much demand. It's a great way to backfill inventory. To Mario's point, at weather we see huge spikes in traffic when there's a weather event. It's hard as a direct sales force to monetize every impression when you don't know what's going to happen. So this is a great way to supplement that. And so the health of this marketplace is thriving. I just think this one little piece isn't, and we spend all our time talking about the one little piece when, whatever, it doesn't, we can still have I guess I have as much control as I need in the regular area as I do privately.
I think, if we're being honest, I think the friction that's coming from the marketplace is operationally on the sell and buy side. There are changes in responsibilities. You have sellers, which you have direct sales steps, which are markets softening. On the buying side, you have traditional media planning and their role that's changing, and you have assets among the buy side that are shifting. You have, I don't want to call it conflict, but you just have change in the marketplace right now, and there's going to be some challenges around that. What sellers are selling are going to be different than what they're going to be doing later. Will you need a 50-person sales force? Probably not, but you'll probably still need the same 50 people doing different things, right? You'll need data, you'll need someone running business, business relationships. And it's complicated. But it's not. We still have things that we need to sell, and there are things that that people need to buy. So the private exchange, if you look at it from my perspective, was really just a means of getting into the exchange market, where you had publishers that had somewhat of the same control that they had directly in their ad server, and buyers had somewhat of the same control that they had as traditional media planners. The market doesn't work that way, and that's why in the open market, it's thriving. As Jeremy mentioned, the health of this marketplace is continuing to rise. And what's the great thing about, as more publishers get more accustomed to using data and using the technology advances, the rates are only going to rise. So the more demand, the better the inventory, the better the rate. So there's a lot of growth here potentially.
I agree with both of those comments. So you asked the question, where were expectations not met? And I think where private exchanges have struggled, and I do think your points, Jeremy, were really spot on as well. This is not that RTB is struggling. I think everybody in this room knows RTB is doing phenomenally well. But where expectations were not met or have not been met to date is basically we've introduced more friction than we have liquidity, is really the bottom line. It's harder to buy on private marketplaces than it is other places. And already the adage was true that it's harder to spend $10,000 in digital than $1 million in TV, or whatever the adage is. But that's still true, though. So basically, I think what we have to do is make it so that, so two things that both Mario and Nick said that I think are really interesting to point out. They said we have to create the controls for publishers. And I think they've done a great job of that. I think that's what they've done. I think that's a necessary step. But there's something that has fundamentally changed for publishers, and that's that it's been a buyer's market all along, because there's always been more supply than demand. And as far as we can see into the future, that will continue to be the case, which means that buyers can demand what they want. And they can say, I'm not going to buy it if I don't have transparency. So private exchanges have largely been something for publishers to package up inventory the way they want to, the stuff that isn't sold, the way that they would like to sell it. And buyers are saying, no, I'd rather you just send me one by one, and I'll tell you which ones that I'd like to buy. And then some at scale are starting to say, well, as long as I can pick which ones I want, I'm happy to buy them at scale and in bulk and with guarantees. And that's where I think the future of private exchanges exists. But the controls that have started to be built on the sell side, we're just now getting to on the buy side, which is necessary to make it all work.
I think one of the things we've got to recognize that we're probably 12 to 24 months behind what this really could be. And you brought up some great points here. And I think that ideally the technology would be in a way that Mario and his team could A, package his inventory and put it up there for any of the buyers to go see as it is, like a shop window. That's the first part. B, you could put up your RFPs. Yep. And Mario could look at that and his team going, okay, we see what's coming. Let's package something specific for you, right? There's another aspect of that where you could go in and see inventory and make a reservation for that inventory in quantity, right? That's a third piece. And I think the fourth piece is where you go in, you can see it, right? You can run first party, second party, third party data against it, whatever you need to, and then you can book to buy it, right? And this is the evolution of where we're going with private marketplaces. We're such at early stages here of infinity of possibilities that we talked about growth here. This is an industry that's, I think, is just not growing fast enough. Right. We need to adopt the technology faster and quicker and look to that. It's not about getting rid of your sales force, it's about redeploying them. It's about having 3 times the volume with the same number of salespeople, right? And how do you automate that particular process of it?
Good. I'd like to direct this question to start with Jeff to get a buyer's perspective and then open it up to everyone else. As a publisher who's been approached about private exchanges, one of the things I consistently hear is the quality of the inventory. You've got to have something different. They throw around terms like, I'm sorry, looking at my notes here. Joanna used her smartphone this morning. I'm a little bit older, so I need it a little bigger. I'd use my iPad here. But some of the terms you hear are singularity or exclusivity of the inventory. So my question to Jeff is, are you seeing that the publishers, from the buyer perspective, are the publishers providing something that is unique and different at scale that can't be found somewhere else? Is that being accepted, adopted? And then I'd like to hear from the rest of you.
Yeah, so at scale, I absolutely think so. I mean, not all inventory performs the same, and I know that a lot of premium publishers hear the word perform and they say, well, that's not us anyway, because we're about brand. The thing is, the transparency and the open market gives you that opportunity to take advantage of both of those things. So I think that things like singularity, which is essentially another term for exclusivity, where you choose one SSP to work with as opposed to working with several. That doesn't happen very often today, and it's just because the sell-through rates aren't that high on any one of them. So it creates some amount of sort of artificial scarcity to put it into 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different silos. It's become more complex for publishers to manage that stack than probably ever before. So I totally empathize with those problems. But the direction where we're heading, and from a buyer's perspective, what we want is transparency. We want to know exactly what we're buying and where we're buying it. We're absolutely, as buyers, willing to pay a premium for brands that match up nicely with brands that we're representing. And so when it's transparent, it gives us the opportunity to bid a premium. And whether that's on performance basis or a brand basis, I think that's the direction we're heading. I think the exclusivity question is an interesting one, and I think there are some mechanics of programmatic guaranteed that are going to push things in that direction, which I think will simplify things for publishers. But right now, they're just trying to figure out how to monetize everything as best as possible.
So I would say that once you lay in the base of everybody participating, right, in real-time bidding, then you get into the conversation of marketers always want, they want to own something. They want preferential treatment. And so with that in mind, you get into conversations around exclusivity and guaranteed. And then it operates almost more like a TV marketplace than anything else, where you actually have equal supply and demand, and people want to buy stuff in advance to lock out their competitors or get something that no one else can have. And so I love the conversation around give me something special, or I want to know that I'm on great content. Because then what I do in response is I say, okay, that's great. Let's have a conversation about how we can do that for you. You can keep doing what you're doing across the entire ecosystem. But if you want something premium and you want a preferred relationship, we can talk about that. So I think that I like hearing that people are worried about that, because that plays in a premium publisher's favor, either way.
I think, having spoken to a lot of publishers from around the world, they've all got inventory that they think is premium, which is the whole quality thing, which is, we can have a little bit of fun with that. But realistically, you've got high quality inventory, which let's just determine as high price CPM. You've got high price inventory, medium price inventory, and you're going to have some lower priced inventory. Right? And these tools that are now available for many of the publishers, and they're taking advantage of them, allows them to segment in such a way. So you can still have that conversation with a trading desk that comes in and says, I want to buy your inventory, I want first look at it, and I'm willing to pay a higher price for it. And you'll say, well, how much? Okay, so let's do, give me 5 million of that campaign, and I'll set aside for you that particular access to that particular audience. So that might go into your high-level volume. You can still use the technology to automate that process, which is what this is all about. Then you've got medium that you might want to package in the shop window in concept, and that goes into different. And then you're just going to have inventory that's at the lower level. You want to push it onto the marketplace, into an auction-based environment, and there's a lot of people that want reach and audience and so forth that will pay for that, and you'll get a little bit more for that than you actually anticipated. So I think it's up to the publisher to be able to segment how they want to do the inventory, and then how do they want to leverage the technology to maximize it. And I think the buyers are willing to do that as long as they have transparency on what they're buying.
Absolutely.
Right, with those things. And the tools are starting to be there, and will continue to be developed over the next year or so.
I mean, I would just add that publishers can't just say that they're premium. They have to prove it, okay? And it comes down to proving the value of your inventory, not whether it's content, whether it's audience. And at the Weather Company, we fundamentally believe that every impression has substantial value. And the reason is that the weather affects everybody. Whether it's a sunny day, whether it's a cold day, it impacts what you're going to do, what you're going to buy, your mood. And there's a value to that you could place on almost any impression to any person at any time, multi-screen, on a hyper-local level. There's value there for a marketer. And so I promised I would give Vikram a shout-out. Vikram Samoya came
Drop an
over
F-bomb.
to... What's that?
Drop an F-bomb.
No, I will not. Vikram joined Weather Company roughly the same time as me to help build out this product that we have called Weather Effects, because weather affects everybody's day, no matter where you are at any given time. And there's a way that you can provide that value at scale on a very local basis across multi-screen to any marketer at any time. And so that's an example of, hey, advertiser, run on my site because we're premium. Like, that conversation doesn't work any longer. But going to somebody and saying, look at the value we're creating in real time for you on a national level, targeted locally, is a very powerful conversation, I think.
Yeah, the challenge that I see in some very, very valid points there, but the challenge is that buyers often don't have, they're not property specific, they're audience specific, right? And so they want to be able to come into a place where you can buy your audience along with multiple other audiences across multiple other properties and put all of your campaign money through it, as opposed to I have to deal with weather, I have to deal with 5, 6 other sites. That tends not to be the buying patterns that you want, right? You want to be able to go in. So this is why private marketplaces will allow you to put your audience in there, and you can come in and grab, that's 1/10 of your campaign spend, right? And then you've executed the whole campaign. You're going to benefit from that more, and so will a lot of other people. And of course, you're going to be able to use all your campaign money. Is that
I think
right?
that's absolutely right. And I would actually also just point out that people are often, from the sell side, are often saying, there's a premium on my site. Why don't you pay this high premium on the site? And on the buy side, we're saying there's a premium on our audience. The real holy grail, and where the $100 CPMs come from, are when we're buying our audience on sites that we love, and we get all of them, right? And so finding a way to do that, and I think there are technological ways to do that inside of Deal ID, which again brings us back to programmatic guaranteed, but that is where I think really high premiums come from, is when actually both of those converge, instead of us saying, we want audience, here's our site, premium.
That's the patterns we're seeing. That's the patterns why people are getting $10, $15 for, I'd say, mid-level inventory as opposed to really high-level inventory, is that we're able to aggregate it in such a way and you can go in and do the buy across it.
But there's you mentioned singularity, and I'm a big fan of singularity because I think it's quite possibly the most important thing that's not being discussed in the marketplace right now. And what I mean specifically by singularity is that if you create these segments and you create these audiences, from a publisher perspective, we have to be able to go to the buy side and say, well, we're the only place that you're going to be able to get this. Because as soon as the buy side says, okay, well, that's great, but your inventory is also available on this, and this exchange, you as a publisher, you hold no weight, and you have no understanding of what the true value of your inventory is. So when I talk about singularity from the publisher perspective, it is the single most important thing that you can decide, and it will be the single hardest decision that you'll ever make as a publisher, because you will have to create singularity of channel and limit who else is putting your inventory up in the open marketplace. Now, this also works on the other side of the equation, on the buy side. The big challenge on the buy side is, who is responsible for this channel of buying that we can be strategic with? And right now, that hasn't really been defined. So we're both sides are operating with multiple sales channels and multiple buy channels. And I think over the next year or two, this concept of singularity will be the most important thing, because the premium publisher set, and certain publishers are much better at this than others, obviously. The premium publisher set, we want to be strategic with the programmatic channel, because there is tremendous upside, there is tremendous efficiency, and there's tremendous amount of value in that. But until we can solve the singularity of it, and until the buy side can solve the singularity of it, we're going to maintain this friction, because we just don't know who to talk to and what to talk to and how to talk to.
Isn't that where your direct sales force comes in?
That too, but you still have singularity of where the inventory lives. So, and I think of some of the testing that we've done using demand side partners is that we go and look at where inventory is coming through a number of different URLs, and even some of the trading desks that we've talked to, they said our biggest challenge right now is we want to have relationships with publishers, but we see URLs from a million different sources. So how do we ensure that it is private, and because how do you have full attribution if inventory is coming through a million different places?
Put it on Rubicon.
Yeah, that's
Jeremy, you want to have the last word, and then
so
we're going to
I
wrap
just
up?
wanted to say that, you mentioned, weather is an individual property and advertisers want audience at scale. The weather company isn't thinking about our future as just an onweather.com opportunity. Weather affects somebody no matter what site they're on. And we think that we have a very valuable product that can be beneficial to any marketer across their entire spectrum of partnerships. So I would just say that traditionally publishers have said, my property is my property and that's what I'm going to control. We're not thinking like that any longer.
Great. And I think we could have a whole panel discussion about the whole value dynamics and how both RTB and private exchanges are changing that equation of who decides what is premium content and what is premium inventory. And hopefully Steve will have us back to do that on another panel. We're about out of time, and I think we're the only thing between you and lunch, but do want to open up if there are one or two questions out from the audience.
Hey guys, Jesse from LiveRail here. Question kind of sticking with the, I guess, recurring theme of friction versus value. We just heard a panel previous to this one that's arguably about the biggest private exchange out there, Facebook. Can't get much more friction than having to do a direct integration, having to work with custom ad units. So clearly, specifically for Jeff, there's a tipping point there where giving your clients access to inventory that they want will validate things like spinning engineering cycles and stuff that's very expensive for technology platforms. Specifically asking about deal ID, and this one's for Jeff, but would love to open up to some of the supply side guys as well. At what point do you think the need to build a specific product to transact with programmatic guaranteed offsets the cost of both operationally and from an engineering perspective building that tool set, and why has the trade desk and probably by my count like 15 other platforms now built this tool, and what does it mean to private exchange?
You bet. So, and it relates actually to the singularity question as well, which is when you have a deal ID and when you have stuff that's working, we would always like to get more of that, right? So there is always some amount of scarcity in that there's only a limited amount of advertising that actually works. And by works, I don't just mean performance, whatever your goals are. And if that's from a brand perspective, there's only a limited number of brands that you can associate with. So we would like to lock those up, and we just fundamentally believe that the guaranteed market that is built on top of the spot market is the way that actually the majority of ads are going to be sold. In the same way that it is in any mature market. It's the same way that it's always been in the history of advertising. So we think that creates a tremendous opportunity, but it has to be built around the price discovery that exists in the spot market. which is why we think the time to make that investment is now. Of course, every engineering team or every company that has technology has to make that determination for themselves based on the risk reward and where they sit in the ecosystem. So I wouldn't say that that's the same for everybody, but from a demand side platform that is focused on being a platform for the buy side, that time is right now. We have to make that investment.
All right, and I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, but please, round of applause for our panels. That was great, informative discussion for me as a publisher. Hope you got too.